Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey, here bringing you another bit of pre-season content. And today we're going to be answering a pretty big question, and that is whether or not we can fit Salah into our FPL teams for game week 1 or not. I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but I am going to try to map out all of the logic and the reasoning behind my decision making and try to come to a conclusion for my own team today. In the meantime, if you could like and subscribe to the channel, that would be greatly appreciated. Every like and every subscription is really helpful at this stage. But in the meantime, let's crack on with the show. Alright, so first things first, I just want to break the ice, as it were. Nobody is saying Salah isn't an amazing FPL player. He is probably the king of FPL over the last 5 seasons. Regular 200-point finishes, and once in the 300 club, which hasn't ever been done before either. So Salah is the king of FPL. However, there is an argument at the moment on FPL Twitter mainly as to whether or not Salah actually is value for money in our FPL teams this season. Now, I'm going to go through the stats just to scare everyone a little bit to start with. 0.56 XG per 90 last season on what was considered to be probably one of his weaker seasons in terms of points-wise and goal tally is still ridiculously good. That is over an expected goal every other game. And for a midfielder, or at least classified midfielder on FPL, that is almost unheard of. XA also isn't bad either. 0.19, that's an assist once every 5 games on average if you look at the underlying data. So that really helps bolster those overall points totals. For a player like Salah, that also probably comes with bonus points as well. So like I said, he is an absolute monster of the game and he's hard to go without. 19 goals, 13 assists last season. That's over 30 attacking returns yet again. So even though he probably wasn't the pick last season, he was still an absolutely brilliant pick, and having him in your team at different points last season as well as over the last 5 seasons, he's been one of the best players in FPL. 239 points, 200 club again. This man knows how to score points, so nobody is disputing how good he is. It's just that price tag, and when there's so much value elsewhere in the game this season, he might be slightly harder to get into our sides, and I'm going to explain in a moment just why that might be. Okay, so next up, it's all well and good saying he's got great underlying data, but how does he stack up in comparison to the other midfielders in the game? So what I've done is taken out all of the midfielders that didn't have over 10 appearances last season, and I've just focused on the underlying XGI data per 90 minutes across all of the midfielders who regularly started matches and are therefore more likely to feature in our FPL teams this season. As you can see, he obviously comes out top, 0.75 XGI per 90, mainly weighted towards goals, as you've just seen as well. This guy is a fantastic pick. Second place is Kevin De Bruyne, and again, he is usually a pretty decent pick in FPL. What I would say is, even though he's very close in terms of the underlying data across XGI, so that's expected goal involvement for anyone who's not aware, that is mainly weighted towards assists, and obviously for a midfielder, you get less points for assists than you do goals. So Salah is undoubtedly a better pick than Kevin De Bruyne, although Kevin De Bruyne does come in slightly cheaper at 10.5 this season. I don't think he's going to be featuring in a lot of our teams though, because he's still working off that injury from the back end of last season that he got in the Champions League final. Moving down the board slightly, Diogo Jota is another fantastic option when we look at the underlying data. 0.62 for a midfielder is fantastic. Much like Salah, that is mainly weighted towards goals as well. So if he can nail down a starting position, he will be a good pick. Interestingly, Garnacho features on this list, and he has come in really cheap this season in FPL. So if he starts getting regular starts, he could be a fantastic pick as well. Another fantastic pick from last season, Marcus Rashford, 0.57 XGI per 90. That is still incredibly good. Over 0.5, it tends to be the territory that we look for in midfielders. And again, much like Salah, much like Jota, that is mainly weighted towards goals as well. So there's no doubting that he's a fantastic pick in his own right. But I think it's good that he's come into the game significantly cheaper than Salah, because that 3.5 million difference between the two probably counts for most of the difference in the XGI data as well. Overall, though, it's worth mentioning Salah is head and shoulders above every other pick And even though De Bruyne comes close, like I said, that's mainly weighted towards assists. So there's good reason why Salah has been so highly sought after in recent seasons. He really is the best of the midfield options we've got to pick from. Right then, so far it's been mainly pro Salah, and most of you will be wondering, why on earth shouldn't I pick him in my FPL sides? Well, now we kind of get into the interesting stuff here. And when Erling Haaland came into the game last season, I think we all knew he'd be a big player, but I don't think any of us really expected him to be just quite as influential as he has been, and as much of a perma-captain in so many of our sides last season as he was. 14 million is very expensive for any player in FPL, but I think if anyone's earned that price tag, it probably is Erling Haaland. 85.8% owned last time I checked, and that is rising day in and day out at the moment. He is going to be very, very highly owned going into game week 1, and I don't expect that to drop anywhere in the first 8 or 9 game weeks. City's fixture run, which I'm about to show you in a minute, is very, very positive. But how does all of this compare to Salah, and why does it matter if Haaland's in the game? Why would that mean that you can't really have Salah either? Now, as you can see in the XG and XA, Haaland overall beats Salah, so XG per 90 of 0.93. Again, this is all provided by Fantasy Football Scout, so do go and check them out if you get the chance. 0.93, that's nearly a goal every single game, or at least an expected goal every single game. That is nearing to double what Salah is producing. Now, obviously, for a striker, you do get 1 less point for a goal, but strikers also get heavily weighted in the bonus based on the goals they score as well. So every time Haaland scores goals, it is likely he also accumulates bonus points too. Salah is also pretty likely to get those bonus points, but he is slightly more wasteful in front of goal, and midfielders aren't rewarded as much for their goals as they are other things in the game as well. If they were to score 30 goals each, I would expect Haaland to get more bonus points overall. As you can see, 19 goals to 36 goals last season is a huge disparity, 17 goals in between them, and that's almost double the goals for Haaland that Salah got. But the most essential point out of all of this is the fact that Haaland came in to the game in his debut season with 272 points, only 30-ish points off of the overall all-time record, 4 points from a single player in one season. And again, he did this in his debut season. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean you can't go without Salah, but what it does mean is that we've got a fantastic pick to captain week in, week out in Erling Haaland. Having Salah in your team doesn't mean you have to captain him, but I think he does lose his value slightly if you never plan on captaining him. If it's always going to be on Erling Haaland, then you're better off spreading the rest of the budget across a number of other assets who you might expect to get 80 to 90% of the points that Salah might, but if you're confident that they do that, over a long term, over the season, you're safer to just go with one captain pick that's going to outscore Salah week in, week out for points, and then also be able to pick 3, maybe 4 of those 7.5 to 8 or 9 million assets across your defence, in midfield, and maybe even a second striker as well, that are also going to accumulate a lot of points. If you go with Salah, you have to make sacrifices elsewhere in your side, meaning you might have to drop an 8 million midfielder down to a 5.5 or even a 5 million asset. If you look at the depth in the game this season, there's not a lot of options around that price point that I'd personally be very comfortable knowing that if you add their points to Salah's points, they will match 2 8 millions or 2 8.5 million midfielders. So it's about that combination for me. And if you don't think you're going to be captaining Salah in the first 6 or 7 game weeks, then it probably is worth having a look at what you can do with that extra money by moving it about your side, adding an extra 3 million to your midfielders, or an extra 3 million at the back to get to Trent, or maybe even up front upgrading a 6 million striker to an 8 million striker. The net points that you might gain from that might be higher than Salah would be able to provide. So that's the argument against Salah if you're not ever going to captain him. However, are we going to want to captain him? So what I've done here is directly compare Liverpool's opening fixtures to Man City's, just to see whether there are any opportunities to go against Erling Haaland and back Mo Salah as a captaincy option. Now, I don't think many of us are going to be tempted to do that in game week 1, although Chelsea might not be at their best yet under new management, new system, new players. They might not be at their best. I don't think there's many people who would argue that Burnley is a worse fixture than Chelsea. Burnley away, opening day of the season. Erling Haaland's ownership is going to be around 85 to 90%. And when you add the captaincy data onto that, his effective ownership will probably be above 160%. If you want to back against him in game week 1, that is completely your call, but it would take a braver person than me, and barring an injury, I think it's safe to say that Erling Haaland will be my preferred captain in game week 1. Game week 2 is where it does actually get quite interesting though. Man City are at home to Newcastle, which isn't a great fixture, but I don't necessarily think that that's a bad fixture for Erling Haaland. Newcastle obviously are a good defence, but Man City can score against anyone, and especially at home, Haaland was an absolute monster last season, so I don't think I'd be too scared of captaining Haaland in that game by itself. However, when you look at Liverpool's fixture, Bournemouth at home, that was a 9-0 last season. And I think a lot of us will remember the fact that in that 9-0, Salah didn't get any returns whatsoever. But I'd probably cast that out of your mind. I don't think that really makes much difference. That is probably just the way things go sometimes. Overall, I'd say Salah is probably arguably a better captain in game week 2 against Bournemouth at home over Newcastle at home for Man City. But I don't think there's a lot in it. I think Liverpool will probably be more likely to score plenty of goals, but Erling Haaland does mop up most of the goals for Man City, and even if City are able to score 2 goals against Newcastle, I'd highly expect Haaland to get at least one of them. So I don't think the points difference between Salah and Haaland is going to be massive in game week 2. So is that really worth having Salah in your draft just to potentially captain him in one game week? From game week 3 onwards, Sheffield United away, Fulham at home, West Ham away, those are all 3 good fixtures for captaining Erling Haaland. Newcastle away, Villa at home, Wolves away. Not the worst fixture run for Salah and captaining him, but if you're going up against Haaland, 160+% effective ownership, I would expect him to be scoring a decent haul of goals in those 3 fixtures between game week 3 and game week 5. I don't think we're going to be putting the armband on Mo Salah much in between game week 3 and game week 5. So if you look at the spread, there's probably one game week that Salah does stand out over Haaland as potentially the better option for captaincy. Is it worth having Salah in, spending that extra 3.5 million over a 9 million midfielder per se, and having him as your captain in just one game week when you are probably not losing that much anyway by having Haaland and captaining him in game week 2 against Newcastle at home anyway? It's a tough call, and I think those of you with Salah in game week 2 will probably have the better of it, and I would expect you to make up ground in that week. But over the long run, I'm not so sure that Salah represents the value if I'd only be captaining him once in that opening stretch of 5 game weeks. A lot of you might be asking, well, you could just sell him after game week 2, and that is completely valid. I could, but I personally don't really like booking in too many transfers at the start of the season. A lot can change. A lot of my other players will probably either get injured or maybe rotated. Things happen in FPL, especially at the start of the season when managers are shaking things up and unpredictable things do happen. So I like having those transfers in my pocket and not booking them in, knowing that I have to get rid of Salah after game week 2 because I know I'm not going to captain him. Obviously, that is one way of looking at it. The other way is that he's still a fantastic asset. Even if you don't captain him, he's still going to provide decent value and get you a load of points, and that's completely valid. But let's take a look at what this means for our drafts going into game week 1 and whether or not the balance with Salah or without Salah looks a little bit better. So to wrap up this video, what I've done is taken a look at what our drafts might look like with and without Salah at the moment. And via DraftHound, which is a great tool, by the way, I've taken the liberty to put together what is quite a template looking draft for game week 1 around the FPL community at the moment. This seems to be there or about what a lot of people are looking at right now. DraftHound is a fantastic way to take a look at these different permutations for the first 3 game weeks, and I'm lucky enough to be partnered with them for the 23-24 season. If you wanted to check out the app or the website, then please feel free to do so via the link in the description below. There's absolutely no obligation to use the paid version of the app or the website, but if you wanted to do so, all of the options are there for you, and you do get access to quite a lot more data. Please take a look at the free version, see what you think, and I'm sure you will get good use out of it. So what I've done here with this first draft is quite template, I would say. Pickford in goal, Shaw, Gabriel, Estupiñán, Rashford, Saka, Bruno make up 3 quite strong midfielders, and then Mbeumo and Mitoma are the 2 6.5s. With Haaland as captain in game week 1, obviously, and then Gabby, Jesus backing up in the second striker spot. This does have 2 million in the bank, so I could make it some way to Salah with that 2 million, but I'd have to find some money elsewhere. Now, the really interesting thing that I wanted to highlight for this section is the expected points at the top of the screen. Now, with this draft, it's 60.4. What I think this does do is show the balance of the team overall. As you can see, there's a pretty decent balance because I've only used 1 premium. There's no Salah in this draft. There's not even any Trent in this draft. So the money is more spread out across the 11. And I've even managed to fit in a 4.5 defender on the bench as well, just in case I ever was to need him. 60.4 points I'd be very happy with in game week 1. But how does that stack up in comparison to a draft with Mo Salah in it? So here it is, the draft with Mo Salah in it. And I've tried my best to create a decent balance, and I've used the money in the best way that I possibly could. Now, this is by no means the perfect Salah draft, and if you have a better version of a Salah draft, please let us know in the comments, because I'm sure we'd all love to know how you've done it, which players you've got in, and what balance you've struck to squeeze Salah in. However, what I've done in comparison to the last draft is got rid of Bruno Fernandes, upgraded him to Salah. Now, obviously, it did have 2 million in the bank, so that got me some of the way there. But the way I've made up the rest of the funds is by downgrading the 5.5 million defender in Luke Shaw to Pau Torres, who was already on the bench, of course, but I brought in another 4.5 defender to fill the bench. Now, please take no notice of the fact that I've put in Adoji at the moment. That could be any 4.5 defender. I do have a sneaky suspicion he might be decent, though. The other thing I've had to do is downgrade Mitoma to Enciso, which is probably quite risky. As you'll see in the expected points at the top, we're coming in at 57.9 in the first game week. Now, that is around 2.5 points down from what we expected to have in the draft without Salah in it that we saw previously. And I think the reason is that, first and foremost, they don't expect too much from Pau Torres in the opening few game weeks. If he was to be nailed into that Villa lineup, they do have decent fixtures, so those average points might come up slightly if we think he's going to be nailed, which he could well be. He's a big signing for Villa. And then also the second sacrifice, being Mitoma down to Enciso, is probably a bit more of a minutes risk as well. And if you're confident Enciso does start week in, week out and gets good minutes, he could rise in that expected points data from 2.9 against Luton to something more like 4.5, which is probably where we saw Mitoma as well. So these are the risks we take to fit Salah into our side. It's actually not that bad. I don't think we're sacrificing a lot of our team structure to squeeze him in. But what we are doing is taking a couple more risks in our starting 11. Otherwise, we could avoid and probably have a safer start to the season. And as you can see, the expected minutes do come down in this draft because of those risks, and as do the expected points. It depends really on your attitude to risk and whether or not you can find value in those cheaper options over the 6.5 million midfielder, over the 5.5 million defender, for example. And whether you're happy to get rid of someone like a Bruno Fernandes or a Saka or a Rashford, because you are going to have to get rid of one of those midfielders in order to afford Salah, because we've only got 5 midfield spots. It's whether or not you're happy to make that compromise elsewhere to squeeze in what is inarguably a fantastic pick in his own right. But like I mentioned earlier on, if you're not captaining him that often, is it going to be worth the points difference, the expected points difference that you can see on screen here? But like I mentioned earlier on, if you're not captaining him in the first few game weeks, then what value value are you going to get out of him when you're adding in the combination of having a slightly lesser team elsewhere in comparison to having more of a stacked midfield, a slightly better defence, and the way Drafthound sees it at the very least is the more balanced squad comes out slightly on top. But that's not the only way of looking at it. And obviously, if you think you can find players that are going to create that value elsewhere in your squad, then by all means, please do so. I'm not telling you to not have Salah in your draft. That is your call to make, and I will make my own call independently as well. The final thing to say for this video today is I'd love to know whether or not you're planning on having Mo Salah in your draft for game week 1. So please let me know in the comments whether you're at the moment Salah in or Salah out. It'd be really interesting to see what the balance is on YouTube and amongst the community at the moment. I think I'm Salah out at the moment, but we've still got another 3 weeks to go before the start of the season. I'm sure things will still change, and if he has a strong preseason, it's going to be really tough to go without him. So I'm not drawing a line in the sand just yet, but as it stands, I think I'm probably Salah out. If you've reached it this far into the video, I'd love it if you could leave a like if you enjoyed the video, of course, and subscribe to the channel to see future content from me. I also share my more detailed thoughts on Who Got the Assist, which is a fantastic podcast and YouTube channel as well with my co-host Tom. Usually it records on Mondays. We've recorded a couple of episodes this season already, so do go and check that out on Spotify or wherever else you listen to podcasts, or here on YouTube as well. I'll leave the link in the description. For the time being, I hope you're all still enjoying pre-season and are as excited as me to get going with the 23-24 season. But in the meantime, I hope you have a great end to your week, and I hope to see you again soon.